Will Goldstein here, thekingscourt.com. Again, a chance to subscribe down there to these videos. More people have subscribed, and that's great. More people that subscribe, the more people will come and take advantage of these videos. Again, I released a digital album, All Hail the King. It just, I sent it to my distributor a couple of days ago. So, in the next week or two, it surely should be out, I would think. But anyway, I'm continuing with C.S. Lewis's Mere Christianity. He called it the great sin. I'll call it the great sin, pride. There's one vice of which no man in the world is free. And everyone in the world, when he sees it in someone else, he loathes that. And hardly anyone, except Christians, he says, imagine that they are really guilty of this. In other words, they have it. They don't think they're guilty of it, except the Christians realize they are. But they're really all guilty. And he says, I've heard people admit that they're bad-tempered, or they have men or boys thinking about girls too much, or the problems that they have with their drink, or that they're cowards. But then Lewis says, I don't think I ever heard anyone who was not a Christian accuse himself of this particular vice. In the book, I should tell you, he hasn't used the word pride yet. He's kind of building up to it. Seldom have I met anyone who was not a Christian who showed the slightest mercy to others who have it as well. So in other words, they're disgusted by it in other people, and yet they have it themselves. That's the point he's getting at. What I am talking about is pride or self-conceit. And then he says the opposite of that in Christianity or Christian morals is called humility. So according to Christian teachers, it's the utmost evil. Then he says things like unchastity, anger, greed, drunkenness. And then he says, in comparison, these are really like flea bites. Through pride, he says, the devil became the devil. Pride leads to every other vice. It is the anti-God state of mind. If you want to find out how proud you are, you can ask yourself a simple question: how much do I dislike it when someone else snubs me? Or when they refuse to take notice of you, or they ignore you, or turn away from you, or patronize you. The point is that each person's pride is in competition with everyone else's pride. Pride is essentially competitive. It's competitive by its very nature. Pride gets pleasure only out of having more than the next man or the next woman. People are proud of being richer or clever or better looking than others. Notice he said richer, more cleverer. Okay? Not about being rich, it's about being richer than others. It is the comparison that makes you proud, the pleasure about being above the rest. A proud man will take your girl from you, not even because he really wants her. He just wants to prove to you that he is better than you and he can have your girl. That's the idea. The proud man, even when he's got more than he can possibly want or need, he tries to get still more and do whatever he needs to do to get it, it doesn't matter, just to assert his power. Nearly all evils in the world that people put down, like greed or selfishness, are really the result of pride. Pride will make a man want money, but only up to a point. Once he's got all the money he could possibly want to do anything that he wants, that's what he's saying, then what's the point of money? Well, for a proud man, it's to be richer than some other rich man. He's already got everything he needs. He just needs to be richer than someone else. He's comparing himself. And there's the wish for power. He wants to have more power than the next person. Power is something that proudful people really enjoy. Nothing makes them feel so superior to others as to be able to move them around like little tin soldiers and do whatever he wants with them. And what makes a pretty girl, he spread misery around to all the other guys that think she's so beautiful, and she's trying to collect admirers. Okay, it's pride, you know. He goes on to say often those kind of women are really frigid. He actually put that in there. But anyway, political leaders or a nation demand more because of the same reason, pride. Pride is competitive by its very nature. If I'm a proud man, as long as there is one man in the whole world that is more powerful or richer or cleverer, then he is my rival and he is my enemy. This is the way a proud man thinks. It is pride which has been the chief cause of misery in every nation, every family since the world began. I don't want to go into it, but believe me, I've had to deal with it in my family. Unbelievable. Pride always means enmity. It is enmity to God. In God, you come up against something in every respect superior to yourself. God is obviously superior to us. Unless you know God as exactly that, you don't know God at all, is what he says. A proud man is always looking down on people. And as long as you are looking down, you can't look up. You can't see anything that's above you. You're always looking down, condescending, patronizing people, you know. I've had people say, I'm better than you. I've actually heard those words. It raises a terrible question. How is it that people who are eaten up with pride can say they believe in God and appear to themselves very religious? And then he says they are really worshiping an imaginary God. They admit to be nothing in the presence of God, but he uses the word phantom God. But all the time they're imagining how he approves of them and thinks them far better than other ordinary people. So in other words, they pay a pennyworth of imaginary humility to get out a pound's worth of pride towards their fellow man. It's all pretense. It's not reality. They're just looking down. They feel superior to the next person. A wife towards her husband, or vice versa, or whatever. Or an employer against an employee. Whenever we find that our religious life is making us feel we are better than someone else, we may be sure that we are being acted upon, and it's not by God, it's by the devil. The test of being in the presence of God is you forget about yourself altogether. The less bad vices may come from the devil, but they're really through our animal nature. Pride is directly from hell. It is purely spiritual in that it's not from the animal nature. It's all in your mind, in your spirit. And consequently, it's more subtle and it's more deadly. And then he goes on to say it can even be used to beat down simpler vices. This is one of the things I read the Philokalia. And that's one of the things that in the Philokalia, in the Orthodox Church, it's a book on mysticism and written by monks over like 14 centuries or something, like a long time. And, that was one of the main things that they talked about was humility and, self-conceit as they conquered all the other vices. That's what he's getting at here. And then he says, pride can be used to beat down the simpler vices. For example, teachers appeal to a boy's pride. in order to give himself respect and to behave decently. Many a man has overcome cowardice or lust or having a bad temper because it's really beneath his dignity to act that way. The devil's perfectly content to see you improving in these ways, as long as at the end of the day, all the time, he's setting you up to be a proudful person. I think you get the idea. It's like if you convince yourself that you've overcome all these vices and now you could be proud of yourself, then obviously the final battle is pride. It's just the devil's winning, is what he's saying. Pride is spiritual cancer. It eats up the possibility of love, contentment, or common sense. I'll say that again. It's spiritual cancer. It eats up the very possibility of love, contentment, or common sense. I must guard against some misunderstandings. So now he's saying this can lead people to have some misunderstandings. So now he wants to make some clarifications. And then he says pleasure is in being praised is not really pride. And the child is patted on the back for doing well, and he should be. A woman whose beauty is praised by her lover or husband or something, she should be thankful. A saved soul who hears from Christ, well done, it ought to be pleased. Pleasure lies in the fact that you've pleased someone you wanted to please. The trouble begins when you start thinking, what a fine person I must be. The more you delight in yourself, the worse you are becoming. In other words, pride is all about me. Okay. Vanity is really the least bad and most pardonable of this sort. A vain person wants praise and admiration. They're really always trying to get it, but it's more of a childlike fault. It's a human fault. You are not, a person like that isn't really contented towards feeling about himself. He values other people's opinion enough to want them to look at you. So it's a fault, but it's not really the same as pride. Diabolical pride comes in when you look down on others so much that you don't even care what they think of you. But then he qualifies that and he says, well, in some cases it really is important. It's very right to say often, or he even says our duty not to care really what people think of us, if that's for the right reason. Because we should really care much more what God thinks about us. The proud man says, why should I care for the applause of that rabble, as if their opinion were worth anything? So it's just condescending. It's esteeming themselves far superior to everyone else. So why should I care what they think? He finishes on that subject by saying, they're nothing to me. That's the mind of a proud man or woman. A man is proud very often over his son. Very often, this proud means that he has admiration for someone. And that's really far from being a sin. He's proud of his son. He's admiring what his son did. Okay, that's completely different. Real pride is spiritual ruin. We love and admire anything more than we love and admire God. That's spiritual ruin. And I suppose in a totally proud person who would be admiring himself far above God and anything else. And God wants you to know that he wants to give you himself. And if you really get in touch with him, you will become delightedly humble, because you will realize the vast difference between God and oneself. So it, it's time to really, if you're serious about this, to get rid of all this silly nonsense about your own dignity. And anyway, that's made you restless and unhappy all your life anyway. Trying to make yourself humble is a good idea. And then he goes on to say, I wish I got further with being humble myself. So he admits he wishes he was would have been more humble. And then he says, getting rid of the false self. And that's what he calls it, with all its look at me. And he says, aren't I a good boy? And to get even near humility is like a drink of cold water to a man in the desert. If you actually meet somebody who is humble, all you will think about him is that he seemed cheerful, intelligent, took a real interest in what you said to him. And perhaps if you dislike this man, it will be because you feel envious of anyone who enjoys life so easily. And because a humble man will not, or woman will not be thinking about humility. He will not be thinking about himself at all. In other words, he's thinking about other people. If anyone would like to acquire humility, the first step is to realize that to some degree we must all battle against pride, and we must fight conceit popping up its ugly head every step of the way.